nodes should be defined before you define edges, and they have value because the generic rules that tell you, okay, make sure that you want to do sum first before multiplication. It's okay, but maybe it works for some people who are not really familiar with the programming language. But if you really want to be useful, you need to make dedicated rules for frameworks, for projects, and so on. And then, do you know what are meta-cello configurations?
Like we used meta-cello and we configured something, but that's it.
So the idea is, that you have a special class that defines how to load the project. So you can see that here is one of the first configurations. So it says like, okay, I have a package called Thrushell, and I have a package called Drossel2, and it requires Thrushell, and then for default test or just load two of the packages. And then when the thing is evolving, things are added, and so on. So you can see that newer configurations are not on. Essentially, this is just a thing that tells how to load the project, which packages depend on other packages and so on. These configurations are used in the catalog browser. So essentially, when you open the catalog browser, and all these things are defined by configurations. There is one repository called meta repository that contains configurations, and when you put there any configuration, it appears here. When you press this button, it downloads the configuration and essentially assembles the project. Okay? Now, it's not that easy, because it turns out that if you don't have catalog contact info, catalog description, and catalog keywords methods on the class side, it will not appear in the catalog. And you as a developer have no clue about that, usually. There is some documentation on the internet, but usually you will not put it. You will try to put it on the catalog, and then it will appear, and then you will write to someone, and maybe they will suggest you to add this method if they know. So the question is, why cannot Pharo tell us about it if we meet these methods? And what I suggest to do now is to create our own rule that checks that. Should we do that?
Well, how do we know when we should check for this rule? I mean, you can't just check every class whether they have a number of methods.
Good point. But we have some simple constraints. So first of all, it should be a configuration class. Secondly, it should be a configuration class which is committed to the meta repository, essentially the catalog repository. Does this make sense?
globally. But how do you check if it's a configuration class? Just check
Oh,
the name for it.
We are going to do it now. We want to do it now.
All right.
So let's start with that. Let's create our rule class. So essentially, to create a new rule, you need to create a dedicated class for that. And I will just go to the catalog driver, and I will find that it's in the tool catalog package. And what I will do is I will suppose the abstraction, and I will create a catalog browser metadata missing rule. Actually, it will be even better if you say catalog browser missing metadata rule. Now, we put it in the same package but in a different category. So we put it in the tool catalog rules. Why do we put it in here? Because we want this stuff to be packaged together with tool catalog. So first of all, someone uses this, then they get this rule automatically. Okay, and then at the moment this stuff comes pre-installed into Pharo. But imagine that in the future they want to get rid of catalog browser because it becomes obsolete and replaced by another tool. Then they will remove the rules about it automatically because the rules only belong to the catalog browser. Okay. Now there are a few things that we have to do with the rules. So you see that we should implement name and basic check. Actually, anyway, let's implement name. So this stuff should return a human readable name. Let's say missing the data methods. And it will be installed in this state. So we have the name, and actually we should also define which entities this rule is checking. Because rules, they can check classes, or they can check methods, or in theory, they can check also other things. So on the class side, we need to say, we need to override a method called class, and we say true. So the tools that actually run analysis know that they have to use this rule to check classes. Now, let's implement the actual checking. Okay?
Yuri, may I ask you a question?
Yes.
So I'm live streaming this to you to Facebook. Is it not a problem for you?
No, it's fine.
Okay, great.
Yeah, by the way, I'm drinking mate. If it's annoying in some way, please let me know.
No, it's okay.
I will continue drinking.
Yeah.
So, let's define how we check the stuff. So, how does this method work? It receives an entity that has to be checked, and we know that it will check classes, and then it will receive a block where we have to pass a critique that we detect about this class. The idea is that someone will ask this rule, please pick some class, and if you detect some critiques about it, give me this critique into this block, and then do something with that. Okay. So how do we check it? Well, we will say that a class is configuration, okay, and what else? Class is in catalog repo, and what else do we need? We need to check that actually it doesn't have at least none of the methods required. So we say self required methods. Let's say any of the required methods satisfies any of the selectors satisfies the following thing, that class a class includes selector, the selector, does this make sense for you? So we check if class is configuration and a class is in catalog repo, and out of all the required method selectors, at least one of them satisfies the condition that it is not included in that class. Do you follow that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. So if all of that works out, what do we do? If this is true, what do we do with that? We create a critique, and we have to evaluate a critique block with that. The critique block and then here we provide the critique, and we will create a trivial critique. And guess what? I forgot the API for this thing. Abstract. Good. For an entity bio. Good. So we will say trivial critique for a class. We create a critique for a class, and the critique produced by a rule which is self. Okay. Now, for you to understand the whole model behind this stuff, so there are rules that define how things should work, or in more details, how they shouldn't work. because we actually specify a bad condition. And there are critiques that actually explain there is this class in this case, and it violates this rule. Okay, and then end user worked with critiques. So when you saw this thing, this is a critique. It tells you this part violates some rule which checks if nodes come before edges. And here's the thing. So we save it for now, but now we have to elaborate a bit because, of course, a lot of things are not defined. Now, first of all, let's see how we can define if something is configuration. So one easy way to do that, there is a class called configuration of, and let's just on the class side add this method. Everything which is a subclass of configuration of, it's a configuration. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you check the hierarchy, I don't know what the hell is this, but I know that in case I can get the playground here. Is configuration? Yes, it is. Okay. Now, what if we add object? We get an exception because object doesn't understand this. But we can create this method. Now let's say an object, and we will return false. And so object is not a configuration. Okay, this was simple, right? Was this?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now the problem is that in real life it's not that simple. Because if you check the configuration of PharoClub, its superclass is object. And the reason for this is that long time ago there was no common superclass for configurations, and people were just copying around all the methods needed to make it work. So let's try to make some heuristic. Let's go to its configuration. And let's go to object. How we can say if something is configuration? So we can check if actually let's define this on the class side, because I mean we know that integer is not configuration and the string is not configuration, so this is correct to say that object is not a configuration. But in case we have a class, well, it may be a configuration. And how do we check for it? Let's invent something. So first of all, self name begins with configuration of. About that. Let's check if this works. Of so. Oh, this doesn't work. let's debug it. One.
But isn't it a bit dangerous to do something like that when you change the behavior based on the name of class? Because
yes, it is. It definitely is. But the point is that we have no other solution. I mean, one way to do this is to say, you know what, guys, you have to change your configuration classes to subclass configuration. And we can actually have a rule for that. But on the other hand, if you really want to help people, you need to do something with that.
But there is another option. You could, for example, write an object, like inside object, you could write like is configuration, and then you can ask people just to have this method in their classes. So just
that's never going to happen.
But it's easier than like subclassing from configuration. They can keep their superclasses, but they can just add one more method and it will be.
No, but the point is that you actually want people to subclass from configuration. Because
they don't do
this
this.
is a new way to do things. And either you convert them to the new way, or if you ask like, yeah, for my rule to work, you need to add that. Yes, you can do that, but usually people do not care. So this is one essential thing of quality assistant. It just enters your workflow and it stays there. That's important. Well, anyway, we need to figure out what it is not working. So what do? We add breakpoints here.
I'm sorry, just one more thing,
yes.
like just to clarify. So configurations, these are like the things like baselines, the things we write in like Myroslava configurations to to load our projects from and to specify dependencies.
Yes.
Can you show an example of configuration, maybe to?
Yeah, I was showing that. I will show it again. I just want to do some changes. So the idea was that you wanted to see an example of the configuration. Again, you can go to Rosso. Here is our playground. We browse this configuration. So essentially, configuration have two things. They have baselines that say, well, I have this package and that package that depends on this package. Mm-hmm. And then in other baselines, you see that you have more things. So in the newer version, probably we should check this one. So already here, like you see that in the previous version, they only had Russia and Rosso 2. Now they also added Rosso to spec. And then here, now they added GT, spotter extensions, Rosso core. And essentially, baselines just define, I have this package and this package should be loaded before that package. Besides baseline, there are versions which say that, this package should be loaded with this version. Mm-hmm. That package with that version. Things like that.
So this is like Maven?
Yes, this is like Maven, or like, I don't know what, or like SBT, or Gradle, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Can I have one more general question about rules?
Yes.
So, what is the scope of rules accessibility? So, what can rule access? Is there like, if I define a rule in any package, is there any separation so that, I mean, does the rule have access to all the code I ever save, change?
Yes.
So basically, isn't it a bit dangerous? Because I mean, you can just install someone's package not knowingly, and he just adds the sneaky rule that can check all of your code you're working on and send it somewhere else. Is that possible?
Yes, but just to let you know, when you have a configuration, there is a thing called, no, actually there are even more things. Anyway, in configurations, you have things that can be called before install and after install. So there can be arbitrary scripts that run before things are installed and after. Each class, on the class side, it can have an initialize method, which is called whenever class is installed in the system. So essentially, there are many, many ways how you can do that. And rules are not really special in that way. So definitely you can work with different ways to protect something from something else, but in the current context it just doesn't make sense because you can like inject stuff in many other ways. By the way, if you're interested, I can send you a blog post, I guess, where some guy said, actually wrote how he was stealing credit card info. And what he did, he created some package on Node Package Manager that was pretending to collect some, I don't know, Google performance statistics, whatever, but in reality it was just trying to collect all the passwords and numbers of credit cards and was sending it to the package developer. And it actually worked. So this is an open question. We have to find a way how to deal with that. I would say that it's outside of the scope of this tech talk.
All right, and another one. So, are there any, let's say, constraints on how long can rule? Check itself. I mean, like if someone just write some infinity loop in its rule, so will it crash the UI?
No, it will not. It will definitely cause some problem as always. So there are two things. There is a plain way how you use rules, and essentially you just take a rule. Let's say, what's it called? Is it still Is it the name? No. Is it? Yeah, I don't remember the name of the rule. Sorry. Here it is. Okay. So the idea is that you take a rule, you create a new instance of it, you say check, and you say what should it check. For example, configuration of browser. And then what you get a empty collection because row cell doesn't have critiques according to this rule. But if you're going to check the how was our rule called? Missing rule. If you go for that, then you will get one critique. Okay, that will tell you like classes should have comments, blah blah blah. And this is a super trivial way. You just take a rule, you check the stuff. You can consider this as a function that takes one argument and produces a result, which is a collection of critiques. This is a super simple thing. Now, when you run it in context of quality assistant for this thing, actually it runs on all priority in another process. So whenever you do something in UI, this thing is not running. So if it has a bit of time, it checks it and it displays the result. And also, like when you switch through the methods quickly, again, things are not running until you stop on the method, and then it computes the thing.
All right.
So from this point of view, the UI is responsible to use things responsibly. So the UI implements concurrency and all that magic. Okay?
Yeah.
So, as you saw, our thing is working. It says that it is a configuration. And actually, I'd like to improve it a bit more. I want to say not only it starts with this name, although I think that we can have like 99% accuracy with this thing. But also I know the meta class can understand project. I guess it's like that. I'm not completely sure. Let's check. Yeah, this one is true. So the idea is that I know that this thing is designed in a way that on the class side, it should have method project. Because this method builds the actual configuration object and so on. So in this method, I check, okay, if it starts with this name, and also if it can understand this message, if the meta class can understand this message. And if it can, then I would say like, yeah, I am quite sure that everything is fine. Okay? Good. So for now, we have the configuration. And actually what we can also do, because as you know, in Pharo we have classes and we have meta classes. And let's just say that for meta class, we will also implement this thing, and we will say that the meta class is configuration if how is that method called? The non-meta class is anyway, it's not that critical. It's just that if someone wants to check if this thing is configuration, we will say that yeah, it is. So that's it. This part is implemented. Actually, we should check it again. Yes. Now, another thing is in catalog repo. How do we do that? So again, ideally, this should be on the probably just defined for configurations, because otherwise we don't care, but we can define it for all the classes anyway. So let's again do this in the class description, and we need to implement this method, and let's see how we can do that. So how do we get a repo of something? We can check it directly on this thing. So we can say, okay, can we get the package of this class? Yes, we can. Then can we get Monticello working copy? It's the versioning system working copy. Yeah, we can get. Then I think that in working copy there is a repo Symphony group. Can we get this? Yes. Then from the group we can get repositories. How do they look like? So there are repositories with some locations. And let's get the second one. This is the one we are interested in, right? And the meta repo for PharoClub. And then you say, okay, the location. So definitely I know this by heart because I checked that. But in reality, you can just check this thing and you can check what kind of data does it have, or you can check the, wait, not this. You can check the class itself, and then you can see, okay, in accessing, what do we have? We have location. And then like, yeah, this thing will return the location. Okay. And now we want to check if this is in meta repo for file. So you can say, okay, if this thing include substring this one. And it's true. Okay, so now we can just copy all this big thing. Let me say case out. Something like this. Quite awful. So this is a long chain, but let's see whether it works. So this thing is in catalog repo. It works, okay? So we are mostly done with this. Now we also need to implement the required method selectors. Let's do that. And to do that, I will also open the configuration and just copy the names that we need. Info. Description. By the way, originally we had an idea that we will program something together, but I guess I'm just programming alone.
Yes.
So do we need to wait for you, or do you prefer just to continue like this?
Okay, so my laptop is occupied with I'm screen sharing this. If Myroslava and Andriy can connect to it, would be great.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on you, because it's all about what you want to have.
So, Myroslava, what do you think?
I don't know, we could still continue like this, I guess.
At least for this case.
Okay. So here it's super easy. We just created our own thing, and then I have no clue. I mean, we didn't have any warnings in here. So let's see if whatever thing there is, if it breaks. Yes. Doesn't really seem that it breaks. Actually, one thing which is also good to do is to reset the rule cache, because sometimes there is just okay. It doesn't seem. That's interesting. Oh, I know why it's not working. But anyway, you see that here it tells us that the methods are missing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the thing, missing metadata methods. Now, do you have any idea why on the class side it doesn't say this, and on the instance side it says that?
No.
Does it like when we pass a class, does it change somehow?
I think that we have a problem here, but actually, you know what? We can insert the breakpoint here. Okay. And now when we go to here and we go to the class side, we can go to this place and we can see why it's not working. And I bet that the problem is, but this is very strange, because we are checking things on the class side. Let's go through. Oh shit. That was bad.
Happens. Oh well. Have you saved the code?
Probably not.
No, of course not.
Okay.
Okay, that's the probably biggest problem with Pharo.
But probably yeah.
We will recover.
Yes.
How do you do that?
Use
You
a
can
PC.
recover your changes?
Yes.
It's a PC tool. How's it called?
Yeah, but
Should use
I
it
didn't
once.
know you could do that with that.
No.
People always tell me that I can do this on Discord, but usually I just try to commit my changes all the time.
Yeah, that's a good idea, but sometimes, you don't do that.
Yeah.
But I don't really get this stuff. Like, why doesn't it want to just do everything?
Okay.
And
why
changes?
While you're opening it, maybe I will ask you another question. It's like more general. So, first of all, like, do we collect some data from these rules and from how people use them? So you told me that there are some data sets, and you even sent me some, but maybe you can tell us, like, how is this data collected and what kind of data do we have?
Oh, I don't remember. That's a problem. So the idea is, I don't know. It seems to me that the collection thing was removed already from this image, because usually you would get like a question here to allow collection of data. Probably systems. Let's increase the font. So what I was collecting is essentially each time you go somewhere and you see something, or even you don't see anything. Yeah, so essentially for this case, I would collect the data that some anonymized user ID saw this critique about some entity. Sometimes it's anonymized, sometimes not, depending on the settings. Usually it is anonymized. And then if we click on this, you will get the same thing, but you will just get an info that there were no critiques. So based on that, you can try to assess how people are reacting to this stuff, whether they see something with a critique and then in a short time they see it without a critique, which means that they fixed it. So that was the idea, but I never really explored it to a great extent.
I'm asking this like, is like, can we do some kind of data science based on this data, and can we understand not how people react to quality analysis, but more like how people write code and what mistakes people typically make. So can we automate this process, or because right now we were writing rules like manually, so can we automate this process to make like some rules appear based on like how people make mistakes?
Yes, we can definitely do that. And one thing which was, let's say, the simplified version is that one guy was actually trying to infer migration rules based on the changes of the project. So imagine that you have Rosal project, you monitor how it changes, and then you can say like, okay, in this version it changed like that. So all the clients of Rosal should start to use different API. And then you create a migration rule saying like, okay, you use the old API, now you have to use a new API. So this is just one use case how you can automate something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there is a great potential. The thing is that I didn't look into it almost at all because it didn't make sense to automate things before we have a place to show the rules and the critiques and so on. And yeah, after we got this place, I finished my PhD. I essentially didn't have time for that.
But this question to you: can you really automate generating rules? I mean, how do you even define a mistake? How do you define that a mistake was made if you don't define a manual rule what a mistake is?
Well, I think there are different ways, but like to approach this problem. But what I'm really asking is that if we have the data, because if we have it, then we can find some, some way to use it. So
I don't have the data for rule generation because essentially we need to check that because in theory I could collect full data like source code of methods and things like that if people explicitly allow that. And I am 90% sure that most of the people didn't allow it. So essentially we just have a data in a way that, for entity with this ID, at this timestamp there were this critiques, and at that timestamp there were that critiques, but you don't know what actually changed. So regarding the rule generation, what you can do and what some people were doing, I don't remember to which extent it was successful, is that they were checking the bug tracker, and then they were finding bug reports, and they were finding commits that resolve bug reports, and then they were trying either to try to understand the fix automatically, or they were actually going even further and trying to understand who introduced the bug. And then from this introduction, they were trying to come up with like what kind of patterns of changes are bad because they cause bug reports. Okay. So there is a way to go with that, but I am not completely sure how advanced it is.
But even if you don't have time to work on this as a project, like maybe you could just turn on some data collection, because like for example, if it works for 1 year, then in a year we will have like a huge data set, and maybe someone else will work on it. So it will be cool to like to collect some data at least, because I think your tool is really great for collecting this sort of data, because it gets like all kinds of information about like how people code and how people make mistakes.
This thing is not around anymore. So there was GT event collector. So it's not about my tool, it's about GT event collector. And this stuff is made for collecting data.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that I don't know in which state it is. Because there was always like, yeah, there is this tool, but it doesn't have a good adoption, and there were always things going back and forth with that. And this is why, like, if someone wants to push this somewhere, I can help, but you need to invest some time into that, because you need to make sure that you have a setup to collect the data that you want to collect. You need to think which data do you actually need. Like one thing that was really annoying for me is that I know one guy who was collecting really user interactions. So which code was changed, how did the user move windows around, and so on. But there was no way to synchronize it with my data. So I couldn't say like, oh yeah, there were these 3 things because user changed code like that. And the guy didn't want to collaborate to make like a unique ID that can be used to synchronize events. So, you need to put some effort into that. And I don't have enough time to really monitor this.
And can we discuss this with someone? Like, who is the person to talk to?
I don't know, staff, for our community in general. The point is that these collection things, they don't really bring value in the large scale. Because if you think about that, I collected some data, but how do you benefit from that? And you don't really benefit from that in any way. And unless you come up with some really nice value for the community by saying like, we have Pharo where we can agree to contribute our usage data, and we have a nice use cases how the data can be used to help the community. Your best bet is just to plug in your collector for some time, collect something, and do something with that, publish a paper, and the thing will be disabled or removed or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And like I didn't find anyone who would like to work on really a nice solution to bring some value to the community.
Because right now I know that Alex is working on, and I think he's working together with Serge on that. Like they're using neural networks and recurrent neural networks or reinforcement learning, like to to predict how people write code and like to do stuff like that. And we were talking about predicting errors. Like last time we had a tech talk, so we were also talking about like the potential idea of predicting some errors and so on. So Alex has like some really cool ideas about how we can use Pharo for learning from code.
Yes, yeah, but this is another thing because one thing is if you analyze history, just like commit messages,
Mm-hmm.
know how the code evolves, which is useful. But if you really want to understand how people work with a tool, you need more fine-grained data, which means that you need to spy on people. And this is always true.
Okay.
I mean, again, I can help with that because I had some experience with that. But just to collect some stuff and so on, like you really need to have some presence. So you make sure that you collect the data. That like I discovered that one guy doesn't share his data because it's just too cumbersome for him to agree to share the data. Like he was like, I am fine with data collection, but for me it's just too much to click like 5 times to agree with that. And I tried to discuss how we can simplify that and so on, and no one cares. So you really need to put more effort into it. Anyway, should we check how this thing works or not? If you have some other questions, then please ask.
Well, I don't know if you'll address that later, but so what is the usual way that you interact with code when you check it? So we've seen the example when you add a rule for a plus b multiplied by c, or when we were using Rosal and we were checking that one method should not be called before another ones, but how actually do you work with that code? So do you just work with it as a text? Or is it like a bit maybe better solution, more trickier solution where the code is already, I know, split into some sort of tokens or something like that? So how do you work with, I mean, not just with the class and you check the class properties, but you have a method and you work with this method?
I will show you that. I just, okay. So this thing has disappeared. By the way, now we should do a coffee break. No, not really a coffee break. If you want, so you see what happened. Apparently this is configuration thing. Was lost. It doesn't really seem that it was lost. In meta class, this all works. This should be implemented. I don't know why it's still here. Let's delete this one. You see what happened is that there was an exception while we were checking for violations of the rule, right? And usually, when an exception happens, something explodes and stops working. But in this case, it just told like, there was exception while checking for one rule. And this is what was the exception. Nothing broke, it just was there. And if you want, you can click this button and you can actually start debugging the exception. So again, quality assistant is not only about rules and critiques, it's about properties in general. So one property is a critique, but another property is an exception that happened during computation. And this is a nice thing that Myroslava added during Google Summer of Code. And maybe she wants to talk more about what she did during Google Summer.
So basically, for a lot of rules, they were written in like an old small int format, and that wasn't that wasn't very easy to understand, and it wasn't very efficient. So like a large part of what I did during Google Summer Code was just rewriting the rules in a newer format that used for a lot of cases it used nodes, and basically so I had to write some rules to make them work quicker, and because they were designed that each rule created like its own AST, and then you would have to go through it to find what was wrong. But then was using nodes, I could do I could do it so the AST would be created only once, and we would just have to expect the nodes, and it would be quicker.
So did you create some new rules, or?
No, for the most part, no. I just changed, kind of rewrote the old ones.
Mm.
I think you created something.
Did I? Because I'm trying to remember. And
I think we were annoyed by something, and then you created the rule. And by the way, you fixed some rule that wasn't affecting anything because it was incorrectly implemented. So it was nice.
Oh yeah. And a few rules. So when they were rewritten, was like node-based approach. They were able to find kind of more methods that went against it. Kind of where there were errors, it was able to detect more methods like that, as opposed to the regular version. And I didn't really remember.
Well, I can continue, and if you recall something more.
I think we can share Myroslava's blog on our Discord channel and our Facebook, because she had like a lot of blog posts about her rules.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. Okay, so I want to show you some more things. So as you can see, we have this this critique which tells you missing metadata methods, and it's not much informative. So apparently, if I remember correctly, if we add catalog keywords, this thing should disappear. Okay. So, but the point is that if we don't have this method, and if we don't have this method, and then it tells us, well, missing metadata methods, and you have no clue which ones are really missing. right? So the thing is that this is the flexibility of the model that we have. At the moment, we were just returning a trivial critique for something viral. Let's try to improve this. So actually, we will create a separate critique for each missing method selector. And to do that, we will rewrite this stuff a bit. So currently, I just want to show you another approach to implement this kind of methods, because currently we had just conditions chained with AND, and then in the end we had a big action here, if everything is true. So what will we do is we will say, okay, this class, is it a configuration? Well, if it's not the configuration, then we will just return from the method. But if it is configuration, is this class in the catalog repo? Well, if it's not in the catalog repo, then we will return from the method. But if it is in the catalog repo, what will we do? And then for all the method selectors, we will first select the ones that are missing, and then do something with them. So these ones will we select. As I said, we will select the ones which are missing. So this stuff. The ones that are not in the class. And then for those selectors, we will do the following thing. We will create, we will evaluate the critique block with the special critique, which is missing method critique. And again, I don't remember the API for this one. Wow, and it's actually not that trivial. So what do we do here? We say again, for what kind of thing is this critique for this class? By which rule? By this rule. In which class is the method missing? And it's missing in the class, the meta class. Okay, it's missing on the class side. And we select where it is, select. And yeah, let's do it like that. And I think that there are also more things that we can do, because we can also say that it should be implemented. So after we do all of this stuff, we say, okay, also B should be implemented. We don't care about that. And also I think that we should check here actually for the methods, if it includes that selector. Let's try if this works. What do we need to do to try? We need to say, this is important. And let's see what happens. You see? Now it says catalog keywords, missing metadata methods, and catalog description. And we can actually click on this, and it will tell like, hey, I will create this stuff for you. And it creates the stuff for you, and for now it should be implemented, but then you can change it to this also. So the idea is that we started with the trivial critique, which was just saying like, you have a problem, but then we changed it to the missing method critique. And this thing is designed specifically to tell you that you have a missing method and to create the method if you want. And this is the whole idea of critiques. They are objects, and you can extend them to behave in the way you want them to behave. So there are also other critiques, like critiques that can transform your code, or critiques that can replace nodes, or so on. And if you need the critique to launch a rocket, you can do that, because critiques are objects. I think that it would be nice if we check the critique for Rosa that finds cases where there are edges method which doesn't have nodes before it, because it works on the method level and not on the class level. What do you think? Do you want to take a look at that or not?
Let's take a look.
Okay, but do we have time for it? Like, if you do, yes.
Do I have what?
Like, how much time do we have?
I don't know. I mean, it's a bit late, but no one is going to kick me out of the office, and I have a really amazing wife who will not be really mad at me that I arrive late.
She can watch you live streaming on YouTube.
Yeah, that could be interesting. My daughter could like it. Anyway, let's quickly check that. So this is a bad example, but I just realized it because you see, I implemented a few rules that needed some kind of priority of messages. And I implemented all of them manually, and then I saw that actually each rule just halts if one message is sent before another one. And that's why I made an RT invocation sequence rule, where you can say like, okay, I need edges to be, well, actually I need nodes to be sent before edges, or I need connect to all to be sent after move behind, and things like that. But let's check one of the rules that actually works with methods. So let's go to hierarchy. I think that this should be clean.
Do we have a booklet about quality assistant?
Do I have what?
A booklet.
No, I have PhD thesis.
Okay.
It's a bit longer.
Yeah. I tried reading it, but I got lost on like page 10.
Yeah, I also tried reading it. It's challenging. Yes. Wait. Let's find.
And by the way, you have a really good, you have really cool design of your thesis. Like you have these special letters at the beginning.
Yeah, I try to do my best, but oh, this is again on the other. Yeah, for some reason, I think that we find that. Maybe this is one of them. But this one again is really similar to what you have seen before. So this rule works if you have a method that references its class by name instead of using self-class.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because you want to actually do self-class, because then in the subclass, this method will reference subclass and not the hard-coded class. Now, how it is working, you say check a method, and then you get the class of the method by doing method class instance side, and then you check if that method has literal, and this literal should be this thing. So essentially you get a special literal which represents the class name. And if it is true, then you create a critique about that. I will also try to find some other things. So this is yet another thing. You check if the method sends a message to super, which is not the same as the method signature. So the idea is that if you have a method as string, you shouldn't call like super print on. You should call super as string, and then that as string may use print on or things like that. Or you should use self print on, because then you can override it in subclasses. And again, how it works, you say, okay, method, get me all super messages, and then you check if any of the super messages they satisfy the condition that the message is not equal to the method selector. That's it. Most of these things are easy. There are some rules that are really complicated. But I think that
and why are they migrated?
Because for some, this is so. I will also show you patient sequence. This is so. These are also fun things. Maybe you can see something here. Essentially, these are also rules that Myroslava worked on. And the idea is that these rules receive AST nodes to check. Do you know what is an AST?
No.
Okay. So there is this method. Let's use. We should delete this. So here I have an inspector on this method, right? This is the method object. Okay, and then ASD is essentially a tree model of this method. So you see that we have a method node, it's a tree, right? Mm-hmm. And then it has children, and one of the it has two children which are argument nodes, and one argument is a node, and another argument is a critique block, and then it has a sequence node which has 4 statements. So we have 4 statements here, and we have 4 statements in the model. And the first statement is the message node, like this itself thing. And then the message node has a parameter, which is a block node self, and has a receiver of this message node, which is a node is message. Okay, so essentially you have a tree. Do you understand this idea or not?
Yes, but is it a general thing in Pharo, or is it just?
It's a. What do you mean the function?
I mean AST. The concept of AST.
The concept of AST is present in all the programming languages.
Ah, okay.
So, like to do syntax highlighting, to do these things, you need to actually parse the text, and then you need to identify that this is a literal and this is a string literal, and then you can color this as purple.
So this is basically it's like a syntactic tree.
Yes, AST is abstract syntax tree.
Okay, yes.
That's the point. But you can use it. You have to use it for compilation, but you can also use it for tools. So for syntax highlighting, for refactoring, and for static analysis. Mm-hmm. And essentially, what node rules do. So the checker will get the AST and then will apply a node rule on each node of the AST. Okay. And what this rule does, it gets a node, it checks, is this node a message? If it's not a message, it returns. If it is a message, it checks whether the selector of this message is one of these ones. And if it's not one of these ones, it returns. But if it is one of these ones, it checks if this message is used. What does this mean? Let us go back to here. So, for example, if fall is not used, at least to my knowledge. So this is the message node. The selector is false, if false, and then if I do is used, I get false because the result of this thing is not used anywhere. But if you have this thing, okay, let's go to that part, which is includes, right? This is a message with selector includes. Is it used? It is used because the result of includes is actually a receiver of is false message. Do you understand this?
Mm-hmm.
So wait,
Okay.
if I'm getting this right, so every time you run a method, you build a syntax tree based on it, and then depending on how it went, you update this tree state, and then you after it run its course, you can view it somehow.
You should. Can you ask the question again because I cannot hear you well?
All right. So basically, you build a syntax tree based on the method, right?
Yes.
And at the same time, so if once you run this method, you update the state of the tree somehow.
No. So are you talking now about this rule analysis?
Yeah, but I mean, a node is used. So what does a node is used? Can you just could you repeat it once again? What means a node is used in correspondence to the?
This is just to check how the code is implemented, because if during execution the result of this node will be used in some way, like it will be returned from the method, or it will be passed into another message call, or it will be a receiver of a method, then it's used. In this case, the result of whatever if false returns is not used, like the statement finishes and the if false is abandoned.
Yeah, all right, that makes sense. I just kind of misunderstood what is used means.
Okay, and the reason why we check this is because select, collect, and reject, they expect that you will use the result, because otherwise you can just use do for iteration. And it exactly checks if the message node, select, collect, and reject are used. And you check, okay, if it is the thing, and if it is used, I don't care. But if it's not used, then I will create a critique and tell user about that. And the beauty of this rules is that originally you have to implement them on the method level, and then you have to receive a method. You have to extract an abstract syntax tree out of it. And then you have to traverse this tree and find the things that you are really interested in, and then generate critiques. Which means that for each rule that wanted to do it, we had to traverse the syntax tree. Now, what Myroslava did is that you can have rules that have nodes. And you can actually see here that on the plus side, it redefines check node and returns true. And now the rule runner can actually get all the rules that check nodes. Then the rule runner extracts the AST of a method, traverses it once, and applies each rule on each node. And this is much faster than traversing AST multiple times. And also it's much easier to define a rule which just says like, yeah, is this a message? Is it a bad selector message? Yeah, then we do stuff in comparison to defining the whole AST traverse.
And why isn't inject in that list?
Why isn't what?
Inject. So it has select, collect.
Yes.
And how about inject? Because it can also be replaced by do if you don't collect the result.
Well, it's not that easy because you need to define some seed, But to be honest, I think that someone just forgot about it.
Okay.
Because essentially, like this is a rule which is I don't know what 10 years old or something like that probably. And I think that someone forgot about it, or inject wasn't really a thing in Smalltalk at that point of time. And yeah, probably this rule is missing some stuff. And then there are a lot of rules like that. But yeah, my main focus was to build a framework around them, and not specifically ensure that all the rules make sense. I want to show you one more thing. So there are other kind of rules which use pattern matching, and now this is a bad example. Let's see, let's modifies collection. This can be interesting. So here we essentially redefine initialize, and we specify which kind of patterns does this rule match. And we match a collection that receives a message do, collect, select, reject, or inject, and then has something to do with statements and so on. And then there is an after check. And in after check, what we do, we check if it modifies collection, at sign collection, which is defined here, this one. Okay. And we check if it modifies collection in any statement like that. And how does it work? It actually goes through each statement and then checks if for any node, a node is a collection itself. So this is a combination of actually matching some patterns in the code and then post-processing them in a dedicated method. There are definitely easier cases, like this one, which essentially, again, this generates some strings, but it checks if you have check for size greater than 0, and then you do something with that. Or for object, it's empty false, and then you do something with that. And yeah, this is another way to define things. And for example, this thing is absolutely non-comprehensible. Can you understand this?
Mm-hmm.
What does it check for?
No.
The point is that I don't know myself.
So it should be like a method which has some local variables, and then it should create some new collection somewhere after some statements. Then again, after some statements, it should iterate through this collection and put objects inside. So it should modify this collection using a do block. And then again after some, okay, now I don't understand, because now again after some statements it again creates like new local variables.
To help you, look here, a string and okay, this is
okay, I see.
And that's another one. So the idea is that You create
matches
two
any, I
collections.
see.
And then you iterate over something,
Mm-hmm.
and then you say, okay, this collection, add this index, put some object.
But like we iterate over this collection specifically because like size is also like I can see the size is specified. Like this should.
Yeah. So you iterate over the size of this collection.
Mm-hmm.
You see there is another option that you actually like get the size from the collection itself. And the idea is that usually in this case, this means that you iterate and you get data from someplace and put it in this collection.
Mm-hmm.
In many cases, you should use collect instead of actually iterating and manually moving. But I agree this is a horrible way to understand things. That's why long time ago, in a distant galaxy far, far away, what was it? I did a match tool, and then I abandoned it, and match tool. But the point was that I created an interface that was actually highlighting all the things. And then you could also paste a sample and it will tell you which things did it match and which wildcards were matched with which values.
So it's like regex.com.
Yes, it's kind of like that, but instead of text, you match abstract syntax trees. Cool. And the point is that it is very powerful, but not in this format. So I tried to somehow approach it with match tool, and it actually helps when you work with that. But definitely the rules can benefit much more if it's more prominent in there. For example, I believe that one can create a custom code styler for rules that subclass pattern code rule, and then. Yeah.
But are these rules so commonly used that we need a separate, styler?
So there were some interruptions. I didn't hear you well.
How common is it that people actually write their own rules?
It is not common, but what I learned, let's say, I have some evidence that now it's more common than before I created quality assistance.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is this feeling that there is a tool that can help you to solve your problems. And there were people who said like, I do the same mistake over and over again, so I decided to create a rule that detects that. But this is actually a big issue, and I have not seen any research checking how easy it is for developers to create their own rules, and where do they struggle with that, and how can you help them? Like usually, researchers focus on like how many different type of rules can you create and how many violations can they find, but like no one really cares how easy it is to implement. So yeah.
And can we ship rules together with our applications? So for example, if I want to distribute data frame to people and I want to send them also rules for using data frame.
Easily.
Yeah, that's what I was saying at the beginning.
Easily just put it into package.
That's the same stuff as with Rosal. So rules are packaged with Rosal. When you load Rosal, you get rules that are with Rosal. So you can also ship rules with data frame, and when someone gets the data frame, He also has the rules. Here's one more nice example. So there are rules that can also define a pattern to replace the previous one. So here you can see that it matches cases where you do self-assert, one object equals another object, and it can replace the thing with self-assert equals and two objects as parameters. So this is again a nice pattern matching thing, but it's hard to understand what is happening without match tool, and there was a replace tool by Mark, which won at some point in a competition in the Innovation Awards. Well, yeah. Do you have some other questions?
It's a bit unrelated, but you were showing us AST and also this match tool. Like we wanted to implement like a small interpreter for Lisp in Pharo somewhere in June. So do you think we can use these tools, and will you help us to integrate them in our project?
We can try. You need to define what actually do you want.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess that you want to be able to see the AST of Lisp.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it can be done.
So you want to create some,
It should be simple. I mean, a Lisp is an AST itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like the code of Lisp is a list of lists of lists of lists. So, it's not like you have messages and statements and whatever, you just have lists. So that's easy.
Yeah, exactly. So we want to implement, but we want to create like our own classes that, parse the string, like the code into all these, expressions and so on, and then find, all the stuff like operators and lists and parentheses, and we want to have like our parser and syntax tree, but it would be cool to integrate this also with Pharo tools, so it's not just like our classes that work somehow, but also we can visualize that, and we could use a browser and other tools.
Yeah, it would be interesting. And I hope I will have time to help you with that. I'm definitely interested, but yeah. I mean, I don't want to promise too much because lately I am doing really a lot of things, but most likely I will help to some extent at least.
Well, it's also for us. It's also a problem, like to find time now, because it will be like exams soon. Like not for me, but for most other students here. So we will also have problems like finding time for some projects. But we will share this code on GitHub. So whenever you have time, or just we will really appreciate if you can help in any way.
Okay, do you want to see some, like, one more crazy thing?
Yes?
Sure.
So essentially, critiques are not limited to the coding browser. For example, you can do the browser. Yes. So you see we inspect the Rosal object, and then we can see the critiques here.
Mm-hmm.
Then we can see the description. This description is not nice. But anyway, the idea is that we have critiques in inspector.
But is it only in
You could
407?
also have them in debugger. There's one project that extends debugger for that, also in message browser and things like that. But what I want to tell about is that how code browser works is that it takes code entities, like classes and methods and packages, and gets their properties. How inspector works, it takes any object and takes its properties and displays it, which means we can go to point. And let's say, when we look at the point, we want to see if there is like x and y, x or y, where one of them or both of them are nil, because that's not good. So we can do, let's say we add validations to a point, and validations is a method which, let me just double check, is it called like that? Yes, which return properties. So how should this work? For now, let's keep it easy. Let's keep it simple. So we check x is nil, or y is nil. And then in case this is true, now let's first go with a false, because it's always better to put the simpler solution first, the shorter solution first. So if false, we will return, in general, the stuff will return. And if false, this will return an empty array. But in case this is true, for now we will return an array with one thing, which will be trivial property. This is just some property that I created for demo purposes, but we can create some validation property or whatever. And then it will have title, being like x or y. Yeah. And let's check whether we can see something. So essentially here, if we do a point with 4 nil, oh, there is a violation which tells that x or y are nil. And this is interesting because this is a static analysis on the dynamic data. Because we executed something and then we got some kind of state of objects and we analyzed them, which means that there are these meta-channel configurations which are really complicated, and sometimes they break and you don't know what is happening. But as a developer of these configurations, you can create certain validations that will validate the object when it's assembled, and it can tell like, well, you reference a baseline which is not available or a broken baseline, things like that. So you can help people to debug. But yeah, the main thing is that you can create these properties about any object, and then it's only a question of what will consume. So yeah, if you have any more questions, then I'll happily answer them. But if not, I don't know, maybe we should start packing.
Yeah, it would be wise because like our public transport is not so good at this time.
Yeah.
So probably we like personally I have some questions, but like I will write you on Discord because it's like just more unrelated questions, just something I want to ask.
Okay.
So maybe it also goes for others. Like we can ask you questions like later if we.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I expect that you're confused, but I've made a lot of presentations where I just talk about things, and I think that it made more sense to show you how some things are working, so you can get some ideas about how to solve this or that problem. And yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much for joining us today, and
sharing knowledge,
yeah,
and wisdom.
You're welcome. Thank you for also participating.
like I will stop broadcasting it to Facebook now. Somehow, wait.
Actually, I can stop presenting and it will put a video. Oh, there are still some people walking around.